Hello, 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 hello. So, triple BEE or BEE, no. This is like this acronym takes some time to practice. Triple BEE or BEE. Broad-based Black Economic Empowerment or Black Economic Empowerment. It used to be known as Black Economic Empowerment up until, I don't know, like 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And then they changed it to Broad-based Black Economic Empowerment. The difference was that basically broad-based Black Economic Empowerment brought in more factors like, I think, ownership maybe, as opposed to just Black Economic Empowerment, which was more like affirmative action, which is a different thing. In South Africa, we have affirmative action, which you will also know as DEI in the United States. I don't know what they call it in the UK, but the purpose of this, according to the government, is to redress economical injustices of the past. That's according to the government. According to right-wing or right-leaning organizations, it's a way to punish white people for apartheid or just to punish them, I don't know, out of racism or spite. Now, these are the feelings or the reasons given, and basically what a lot of economists or what the government will say is like, look, the South African Gini coefficient or GNI is about 0.63%, or sorry, not percent, it's not measured like that, 0.63, which is high, it's the highest in the world. And then there's like some like ownership and shareholding, they don't know, because remember, a lot of shares in South Africa on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange are held by trusts and companies, and you can't racialize a company or a trust because you don't know the ownership of that. So, but if you're able to track down if it's just held by a person, then the majority are owned by white people. I don't have the numbers here right now, but the idea then of triple BE is to give more ownership to black people in South Africa, which are the majority, and to narrow the Gini coefficient. Now, inequality versus poverty, like we all know why you don't want poverty, but inequality comes down to your ideological leaning. Like a lot of people will say, well, I'm a hard worker, God bless me, I should get more stuff, and that's fine if that's your opinion. A lot of people say no, like a Gini coefficient should be low. That's the inequality in society, because it causes like instability. And I'm one of those people. I think it causes instability. So, because if you look at like your Nordic countries, like I've said this many times before, I'll say it again. The Nordic countries have like your lower Gini coefficients, including the Netherlands, including Germany, Denmark. And these countries are more stable. People can, and like you can go to the hospital, you can get a good education, and you don't need to worry about that. But okay, South Africa is not one of these countries. Now, okay, I'm a white person. I am per definition like disadvantaged by triple BE as it is now known. But that's also not as important because I'm just here talking about it. I'm just asking questions. Now I've got two questions. One is triple BE, is it like encouraging investment? In other words, is triple BE bringing in foreign money into South Africa to grow the economic pie? The second question I have is triple BEE working? Is it actually like narrowing this Gini coefficient so, South Africa will be a less equal society? And there's a lot of information on the internet, but actually not that much research. It's as if like people are shy to talk about this, and it's understandable. Like you may get cancelled like this video, but it has to be spoken about, because if it's not spoken about and addressed, like silly decisions about this will be made, whether in its favor, like making it more stringent or taking it away. Like one of these two things like will be wrong, or maybe just keep it the way it is. Let's find out. So the history of this, obviously there's a genesis. I love talking about the genesis of everything, not the biblical. Well, yeah, the biblical genesis is the genesis, but so BBBEE as a genesis, okay, a history, a reason for being, and that's like apartheid. So it's one of the most enduring obstacles to inclusive development and national unity. By the time of the country's first democratic election in 1994, the economic structure was heavily racialized. The white minority controlled a disproportionate share of the wealth, land, and industrial capital, while the black majority, comprising African, colored, and Indian South Africans, was relegated to the margins of economic life through deliberate legal exclusion, spatial segregation, and inferior education and labor systems. The dismantling of apartheid brought not only political liberation, but also immense challenges of crafting an economic model that would undo centuries of disposition. It is against this backdrop that broad-based black economic empowerment, BBBEE, emerged as a policy intervention aimed at redressing historic injustices by ensuring the full participation of black people in the economy. So, yes, like, it's almost like a binary. You have South Africa pre-1994, and then South Africa post-1994. And you have these two. You can say there's a third turn, and that's when we have now the new government of national unity. But essentially, when people talk about, no matter what your political leaning is, when people talk about South Africa, they talk about these two things. And one thing you cannot ignore, usually in South Africa, is apartheid. Whether you're pro or against apartheid, you need to, everyone will, firstly, everyone will acknowledge that it exists or existed. That's the one thing, even a conspiracy theorist won't say it didn't exist. The question is just how bad was it? Okay, I think it was relatively bad. Some people say it was like the Holocaust. Other people say, we were better during apartheid. I just say it was bad or very bad. My official view on apartheid, is safely to go with the United Nations version of apartheid, and they voted on it, I think, in the 70s, like 1976 or something. They said, the General Assembly, not the Security Council, the General Assembly said something along the lines of that it is wrong, it's immoral, and stuff like that. And it was voted in like that by a huge majority, like 80% of all members. It's only your European countries and like Taiwan and Israel and a few, like Canada and the United States, which obviously voted in favor of it because of the Cold War. But everyone else was like, it's kind of a crime again, or it is a crime against humanity. So I'll just go with that. In any case, let's look a bit at the legacy of this apartheid. Apartheid was not only a system of political repression, but also a highly structured economic order that disenfranchised black South Africans. As noted by Musabayana and Mutambara in their 2022 paper, black people were deliberately excluded from owning land. starting businesses or entering skilled trades through a series of racially exclusive laws and policies. Their economic role was largely limited to providing cheap labor for mining and agricultural sectors, while entrepreneurial development was actively stifled. The foundation for this exclusivity was laid bare as early as the colonial period, with policies like the Glenn Gray Act under Cecil John Rhodes, which sought to dispossess Africans of land to push them into the wage economy. Yeah, like at one stage, I know, I read this pro-apartheid book, and at one stage they said South Africa's economic growth rate was the same as that of Japan. It was like about 8% a year. It was somewhere in the 80s. But what they didn't say, and I read in some other books, is essentially it's because of the cheap labor. So if you have cheap labor and no unions to change the salaries and stuff like that, you can get some fast economic growth. Most autocracies worked or are working this way. Cheap labor always means like, you know, fast growth, or you get a bigger profit over like work. For example, North Korea. Like North Korea, you don't get to say how much. You don't go waltz into your boss's or your commander's office and demand like a certain salary, or else, well, they'll kill you. In North Korea, when they tell you to work, you ask like to which quality and how much. So that's just how autocracies work, and apartheid South Africa was an autocracy. So like no surprise that, you know, that's how they worked with wages. Post-1948, the apartheid government institutionalized Afrikaner economic advancement through state-supported initiatives like the Afrikaner Economic Empowerment AEE program. This system, or race-based economic promotion, served as a historical precedent for later empowerment models, albeit inverted in beneficiary structure. The apartheid state's investment in white-owned infrastructure and business entrenched racial capitalism, leading to a deep structural imbalances by the 1990s. To give you an idea, so before 1994, okay, there's two more historical points, and that's like basically when, you know, post-Afrikaner rule, like that's when colonial rule ended. That's like 1990, that's like 1948 or something, or the 1964. And then you have like, well, just colonialism back in the 17th century. But essentially when, like, because we were a British colony, South Afrikaans people like me were discriminated against. Like my dad was discriminated against because he was Afrikaans. He worked for Barclays Bank, and it was actually just at the stage Anglo South Africans, like English-speaking people, who got promoted. So the idea, one of the ideas also behind apartheid, apart from like its white policy, its policies towards black people, was also intra-white policies, like the relationship between Anglo and Afrikaans South Africans. And the idea was, that's actually for like, this is a bit off topic, but like the Afrikaner Broederbond, or the ABB, or the AB, sorry, like they basically, my dad was a member, by the way. But that's a story for another time. Like, they tried to protect each other. So basically, it was like you buy from Afrikaner businesses, you hire Afrikaans people. And it was kind of like a way of fighting back to this English domination. So this is one of the reasons, like, also that apartheid came into being. So be mindful that, you know, BBBEE isn't the first time like that there was like a workplace discrimination. So the system of race-based economic promotion served as a historical precedent for later empowerment models. And yeah, this is like, kind of the history. It was the same. It's even older than that. Like when the British came, like the first time to South Africa, that was before Afrikaans people actually existed. That's when Afrikaans people were still Dutch. Like they discriminated against the Dutch, as simple as that. Like, and it angered the Dutch people a lot. That's why they moved out of the colony, is because they could no longer tolerate British oppression. But it went beyond linguistics. And it wasn't about religion, because both were Protestant. It was essentially economics. So whenever you like want an unstable system in any country in any given period of time, like start messing with the economic system. That's how you annoy people. So let's get back to today. Let's get back to post-1994. The democratic transition and the origins of BEE. The South African National Congress, or ANC, that's our ruling party as of the making of this video, upon assuming power in 1994, was immediately confronted with a dual imperative: stimulate economic growth and address structural inequality. Early policy documents, such as the Reconstruction and Development Program, RDP, articulated, that's one of South Africa's 5-year plan thingies, by the way. We have those, but there's like, I mentioned it in one video, but they worked and they also didn't work, our 5-year plans. Like Asgisa, GEAR, RDP. They got some things right, some things they didn't address at all. So the RDP articulated a vision of economic transformation that emphasized redistribution, empowerment, and broad participation. However, by the late 1990s, the macroeconomic framework had shifted towards growth, employment, and redistribution, GEAR. That's another 5-year plan strategy, which embraced market liberalization and fiscal discipline. This created tension between pro-growth policies and redistribution goals. So, yeah, like South Africa kind of oscillated. A lot of people, it's funny actually, like a lot of people will say the ANC was this neoliberal monster. Other people will say, oh, it's a communist-like monster. But it was neither. Or it oscillated between socialism and capitalism. It was never neoliberal. It was never communist. I know the South African Communist Party is part of the alliance, but they're puny. Like that's why the Communist Party never ran in an election of their own, because, well, no one will vote for them. And well, neoliberalism, I spoke about it. It was implemented in Chile. The Republic of Chile. It wasn't implemented anywhere else in the world to its full extent. But when you talk to a South African, like whether they're black, colored, Indian, or white, they may make it seem, according to their specific bias, may make it seem as if we were neoliberal or capitalist. But it was more like a constant oscillation since 1994, a oscillation between more socialist or more capitalist. And with this like BE, it was like still part of the capitalist system. They were very careful not to upset the apple cart. It wasn't like Algeria when the communists or the freedom fighters took over in Algeria. It wasn't this big move away. It wasn't quite like that. Like, it was a gentle transition. Basically, we barely didn't notice it to a certain extent. Well, I didn't notice it. I was 14 years old when we had an election, and I remember reading, my dad got it for free because he was a bank manager, this book, this magazine called, can you hear that? It's a lot of rain coming down now. I should have closed the door. Luckily, this is a unidirectional microphone. If you're a content creator, I strongly recommend you buy a unidirectional microphone, as it's a modulator. It locks to your voice, and then there can be quite a bit of ambient noise in the background, and it doesn't matter. They were building in around my house, so there would have been a lot of noise in some of my other videos, I think. If there was, please complain in that video comment so I can delete it and redo it. Why am I talking about this? My dad was a bank manager, and he got this magazine for free called Finansies en Techniek. He got the Afrikaans version. In English, it was called Finance. I don't even know the English thing, but I read that thing now and then. And not too much, because I'm not a finance guy, or a business guy. But I remember on the cover about 1 year past. It was April 1995, and there was this picture of a sailboat, and it said, "Die skip sail nog steeds," which is Afrikaans for "the boat is still sailing." And that was just Afrikaans people are very paranoid about the transition from apartheid to democracy, because, we didn't know what was going to happen, if the black people were going to take super hectic en masse revenge or not. We didn't know. And, that's why initially BEE, before it became triple BEE, was gently phased in. It depends on who you spoke to. In the state sector, it was pretty much implemented right away. So a lot of your jobs, your cushy jobs and stuff, in the railways and stuff, those just went to black people reasonably quickly. And you saw it there. But in the private sector, which is much bigger than the public sector in South Africa, at least at that stage, you didn't see it initially as much. I know, because I worked for private companies, and the top jobs, engineering, accounting, I used to be an engineer, it was white people. Let's go on. So initial implementations were largely voluntary and focused on high-profile equity deals between established corporations and politically connected black elites. As such, BEE in its early phase faced criticism for fostering enrichment of a few rather than broad-based transformation. By the way, the South African president, Cyril Ramaphosa, that's how he got into business. He used to be a trade unionist, and then suddenly he's a mining magnate, and that's obviously BEE for you. Whether it's righteous or unrighteous, I'm not looking at that in this video. I'm asking two questions, remember. Is it bringing investment into South Africa as of the year 2025? And is it working? Yes or no? I'm just interested in that. Your opinion is your opinion. In any case, for example, this is how, in this initial phase, how Cyril Ramaphosa got into business. I'll do a separate video about that. But then you compare him to other black business people like Patrice Motsepe. Patrice Motsepe was rich from the beginning. He was always good. Even in the 80s, when you can argue it was more difficult for a black person to have a business. But a lot of black people, your older ones, the ones that will now be in their 60s or 70s, if they had any business acumen at all, or if they were connected to the ruling party, they had an opportunity, or even a better opportunity, to get into business. So this is how it started out, and also it was voluntary. So let's have a look at the evolution into broad-based black economic empowerment, the triple BEE. So everything I spoke about was about BEE. Now we're going to speak about triple BEE, and it started about 2003. It was Act 53 of 2003. How old was I then? 23. I'm pretty old. I'm 45, and those of you 45 will know the suffering. In response to the shortcomings of early BE, the government introduced a broad-based Black Economic Empowerment Act, which sought to create a more inclusive and measurable framework. The Triple BE policy framework expanded beyond ownership to include additional pillars, such as skills development, enterprise development, socioeconomic development, and preferential procurement. Compliance was to be assessed through the balanced scorecard system, encouraging a holistic transformation agenda. So you can see it starts with good intentions. If you assume, or if you think, or look at the fact of that, let's say South Africa was a broken society in 1994, it starts with good intentions, all of these things, and a method, the balanced scorecard system, to see if it's there. So it begins like as a good intention. But let's look. According to Creer, in his 2011 paper, this shift reflected a broader ambition to restructure the South African economy to enable meaningful participation of Black people, women, and rural and underdeveloped communities. The Act defined Black people as a generic term encompassing African, colored, and Indian citizens who were disadvantaged by apartheid. Institutions and businesses were required to undergo evaluation based on codes of good practice, which prescribe targets across various dimensions of empowerment. So these were the ambitions, at least according to the academic community. Everything so far was my own opinion. Global comparisons, affirmative action, and indigenization. South Africa's empowerment policies did not evolve in a vacuum. Musa Bayana and Mutambara, in their 2022 paper, highlighted that similar approaches were adopted in other countries with histories of racial or ethnic exclusion. The United States implemented affirmative action policies to increase minority representation in education and employment, while India's reservation system promoted representation of scheduled caste. I love that. Those of you who are Indian, I find this terminology you have for the castes, scheduled castes, amusing. Not that I look down upon it, it's just the way you work with English is quite cool. And so the schedule in India, it was a scheduled caste and tribes in public institutions. In post-colonial states such as Nigeria and Ghana, indigenization policies were enacted to transfer ownership and control from foreign firms to local citizens. These global examples inform the logic behind Triple BE, especially in emphasizing both redress and inclusion. So you see, it's not uniquely South African. We were that creative to think about this stuff by ourselves, and in some cases, I think to a certain extent, it is justified. At least one part of me says so, because if you look, what we had in South Africa, and I'm pretty sure I can say this without looking anything up, is apartheid wasn't nearly as bad as the chattel, how do you pronounce it? Chattel slavery you had in the United States or Brazil or Haiti. It's like nothing like that. That shit was bad. I watched this. If you want to watch, but you only watch it once because it's horrible. If you want to watch a good movie on slavery, watch The Birth of a Nation. Not the one about the Ku Klux Klan. There's a second one. They made it about 10 or 20 years ago. It's about slavery. It's like this black slave rebellion, and in one scene, the guy takes what we call in Afrikaans a beitel, a chisel. He takes a chisel and a hammer, and because this one slave went went on a hunger strike, and he wouldn't eat. He would, shut his jaw, and he took like the hammer and chisel, and he shattered the guy's teeth, and he put in like my microphone. He puts in a pipe, and he starts feeding him that way. So yeah, you watch that movie once and never again. Like, so look, if you come from that, and Brazil and Haiti as well, they're brutal. I know Brazil, the average age of a slave was 30. Very few, actually, no, it's not the average. Like, very few men lived beyond the age of 30. And in Brazil as well, like, they only stopped slavery in 1880 or something. So if that would have been your great grandfather who lived under such conditions. So obviously, there's no intergenerational wealth. There's no money to have sent your, if your great-great-grandfather, whatever, was a slave, he's not going to send his son to university. That's not how it works. Like, so, there has to be some form of redress. Unless it happens spontaneously by itself, then the government doesn't need to do it. If these people somehow pull themselves up by their bootstraps and that's just the way it is, then it's not needed. But if it doesn't happen, if you have this big, like, racialized gap between people, and it doesn't need to be racialized. Like in India, it's kind of the same race, you just have different castes. Like what's the poorest one is the untouchables, the Dalits, and then the richest ones are the warrior class, the Brahmins. That's a religious one. Like, I dated several Brahmin women. Don't ask me why, but essentially, so I know some stuff about Indian culture. So that's thousands of years old. So even in India, it's like, it's bad. Like, you may argue it's worse than slavery because they discriminated for such a long period of time. Now, I'm not going to go into the culture of it, or whether it's, I'm not going to criticize Hinduism. All I'm saying is it's good that India redresses that, because you can't have people who speak different languages and stuff like that be so economically separated. Now, look, I don't have a problem with middle class minorities. In certain places, like, for example, the Greeks or the Armenians in the Turkish, the Ottoman Empire, or let's say some West Indian shopkeepers that went to the United States, or Indian shopkeepers who went to the UK. There's many examples. Like, they become, and actually Indians in South Africa too. They became middlemen minorities. As if you're interested in middlemen minorities, read the book it's called Why Nations Fail, and the other one is called The Narrow Corridor. Those two books. There's there's these classes called middlemen minorities, and they just find themselves in a situation because, well, they're talented. And I don't think that something like affirmative action should punish people like that. Because and in South Africa's case, it's actually foreigners, like people from Somalia, Bangladesh, the Democratic Republic of Congo. They come in and they fill a niche which no one else wants to fill. Like, for example, I used to cut my hair and beard at either Pakistanis or people from the Congo. And why did I do it? They were the only people who could get it right. Like, I couldn't cut my beard or shave, because at one stage I had this super fancy reggaeton beard. But okay, it's too much of an effort. I don't have it now, but the Pakistanis and the people from the Congo were the only people who could get it right. So why should I go to South Africa? you see. This is why, one should also just think about affirmative action in the sense that it may become a negative if it's going to replace talent, actual talent. Like, if it can be measured. Like, and in Africa, getting back to the Nigeria and Ghana, there was like, when these countries became independent, there was still this footprint, like of colonialism, of companies, European companies in these countries doing extraction and like, not really benefiting the economy. Because if you just extract, and you have a massive profit and the other party which owns the mineral has a small profit, like, then, I don't know if it's like really worth the while. I'm not saying like, nationalize the company. I'm not a communist and I'm not a neoliberal. I think both these two situations are stupid, by the way, that both these two ideologies. What I'm saying is just like, go for the most, if you are a president of a nation, you should go for the position, whatever that may be, even if it's closely aligned to communism or closely aligned to neoliberalism, you should adopt the position that will maximize value for the average citizen, whatever that position may be, and you should stick to that. In any case, like, so in their paper, Shai, Molafinyana, and Kino in 2019 noted, public procurement became a critical tool in the South African context, just as it had been elsewhere, to influence market behavior and promote socioeconomic goals. The use of government purchasing power to advance black economic participation aligns closely with sustainable public procurement (SPP) principles, which advocate leveraging state spending to achieve developmental outcomes. So this is common. Like many countries, including the US, will use state expansion to, like, as a monetary policy. And many capitalists are in favor of this, like the Austrian school, for example, of capitalism. Under certain circumstances, when there's high unemployment, or if you actually just want to encourage spending, you can expand the state. I'm not saying chase up a $40 billion deficit like the United States. I'm just saying, if you spend some money, later you can have a small amount of austerity to rein it back in. But that can be a tool for monetary policy. And, that's common, actually. So the early impact and shift towards measurability of BEE and BBBEE. Initial assessments of BBBEE were mixed. On the one hand, the policy led to the creation of a visible black middle class and fostered high-profile black ownership in various sectors. On the other, its emphasis on equity transactions led to the criticism of crony capitalism and elite capture. The failure to achieve widespread transformation prompted the inclusion of more rigorous verification systems and sectoral charters. The formation of the BBBEE Commission and the alignment of sector-specific charters with the generic codes reflecting a growing emphasis on enforceability. Still, challenges persisted, including fronting, the misinterpretation of compliance, limited access to capital amongst black entrepreneurs, and the uneven implementation across public and private sectors. So this has been true since the beginning, and it's still true. I'm pretty sure that you have to be a certain kind of person to benefit from BBBEE. Because you get a lot of incompetent black companies who benefit, And then you get a lot of very highly competent black companies who don't benefit. Like, I have a black entrepreneur friend. He's doing very well, like in the AI field, and like he tried, but he couldn't benefit from like any of these government contracts. So he actually stopped trying, and he just, everything he does is for the private sector. So this is actually where BBBEE has an impact, by the way, is on the government side, not so much the private side. The private sector will get things done, like with or without BBBEE, unless they make the laws more stringent still. But in general, the invisible hand of the market works. Like, people will make money somehow. And this is, okay, by the way, this is where the fronting allegation also comes in. You create a shelf company that is owned by black people, and like, let's say you get a black accountant, you get a black CEO, spokesperson, marketing guy, and it can be a company of like 3 people, and they get a tender and they outsource it to a white company, and then you basically, it's a loophole. But anyway, that's all for now. We will continue with the theoretical models and the implementation mechanisms of BBBEE. Remember, I'm just curious. Does BBBEE bring in investment? Does it grow the pie? And does it work? That's all I'm interested in. The rest is just, kind of my opinion and stuff. That's all for now. Thank you. Bye-bye.